And thanks everybody for being here. I certainly wish that we could be observing together, and we'll do that again someday. But I should also mention that the introduction for John, I think, was a little bit shortchanging him because he's also an astrophotographer, worked with me in the planetarium, and so we're actually going to even share some of his photos here tonight, just to kind of give you a realistic flavor to go along with some of the simulated skies that we're going to share. So let me go ahead and share one of my screens. And we'll start off with a photo that John took. And so what you're seeing is a twilight sky. And you can see that it's getting dark enough that you can see one object that looks like a star, but it's maybe you'll catch like one more here too, but not dark enough to really see very much. And so what happens is we've got all these things out in space. We've got stars, we've got planets, galaxies, whatever. And in the daytime sky, the sky is just too bright for us to see them. But then as the sun sets and the sky starts getting darker, we start to see the brightest objects first. And then as the sky gets a little bit darker, we see a few more that weren't quite as bright, but are still pretty bright, and so on. Well, John captured in this photo the brightest planet. And I'll go ahead and label it. It's bright because it is close to us, and bright because it's covered with white clouds. Just like if you've kind of been in a dark situation and you've seen people wearing different color shirts, it's like Venus, which is what we're seeing here, is wearing a white shirt made out of clouds. So as we start showing you a simulated sky, the first object we're going to see is Venus. But I wanted to share a photo from John because in the simulation, it doesn't quite capture how bright Venus really is compared to the background sky.
And we should also say that for those of you who are maybe new to Moon over Monona Terrace, this is normally a live event on the roof of Monona Terrace Convention Center where we all look at the real sky together. Obviously, we couldn't do that last year or this year, and that makes me, believe that there are some of you out there who probably have never joined us under the real sky, and maybe some people out there who have never been to a real star party. So we encourage you, first chance you get, go out and visit with somebody who has a telescope, maybe one of our events at the planetarium, maybe one of our events at MAS or with Monona Terrace, and make sure you get a chance to see this. Venus is really bright. It's one of those objects that once it starts to get dark, it really stands out and people notice it quickly.
Yeah, you'll know when you're seeing Venus. If you're seeing something that you're not sure is quite bright enough, it's probably not Venus. Now, we have the other planets in the current sky right now too. Oh, I wanted to mention this beautiful photo John took as well. This is what happens if you wait too late to see Venus. We've got a very short window of time to try to catch Venus in the current sky. Now that's each evening. The nice thing is that if it's cloudy tonight, don't worry. You've actually got the next couple of months to try to catch Venus up above the sunset. Now these are the other two planets that we're going to show you how to find. And if you scan around, I found that my elementary school audiences are pretty good at picking out the planets in this scene. And that's because they happen to be the two brightest objects in this scene. Maybe you can pick them out too. Did you pick out this one? That, in fact, is the second brightest planet. It's bright because it's also covered with white clouds, mostly. And while it is not as close as Venus, what it lacks in proximity, it makes up for in size. And so it has a lot of clouds to shine sunlight back at us or reflect sunlight back at us because it's the largest planet. And you might have guessed it, it is the planet Jupiter. And then if you scan around the scene for the next brightest, did you pick out this one? That, in fact, is the other planet, the planet Saturn. So we have 3 planets that are in our current sky that will teach you which direction to look to find. You might also see that John captured an airplane flying through his photo as well.
So you can tell by the airplane's appearance that this was a long exposure. This was probably about a 10-second exposure. I can't remember exactly. And that's about the distance that an airplane would travel in about 10 seconds.
Now, one of the star patterns that we're going to look for is the Big Dipper. And so back in the old days, people would use a dipper to scoop water out of a bucket to get a drink, because the water would be coming from a well and it would be in a bucket, and you can't just drink straight from that large opening in a bucket. Now, there are 7 stars that make that shape with the curved handle and then the bowl. So one of the star patterns we're going to look for is that. It's not an actual constellation. If you want a fancy name for it, it's called an asterism, but it's part of a constellation. Now, the simulation system that we're going to use is actually a free program. If you go to stellarium.com, you can either download the app for your operating system, or if you have a tablet or a Chromebook, you can go and click on Stellarium Web and view the web version. Or if you just want to test it out before you actually download it. Although the apps do have more features than what you get in the web version, but the web version is pretty good. So let me switch over to Stellarium. So this is kind of like what we do in the planetarium, where we're simulating the sky, and it has a lot of the same capabilities. You can set the scene for any location. Not coincidentally, I have it set for Madison, Wisconsin, planet Earth, and we can set the scene for any date and time. And down in the time and date panel, you can see that I have it set for today's date, October 15th. And then this is the time over here. It's in 24-hour format. So 17 o'clock on a 12-hour format would be 5 p.m. And you can see that the sun is low in the sky by that time. And in our blue sky here, much better than our mostly cloudy sky that we have out there tonight, you can see that right along where it looks like the sky touches the ground, we call that the horizon. And along the horizon, you can see the compass directions. So the sun is getting ready to set in between west and southwest today. You can see south over here. And at that time, the moon was just starting to rise over here in between east and southeast. This is still daytime, right? The sun is up in the sky. So if you hadn't actually noticed that the moon is up in the sky during the day, it actually spends half of its time in the sky during the day and half of its time in the sky during the night. Now, the changes that happen in the sky happen really slowly. So if I just start the clock, you're not going to notice anything changing for quite a while. So what I'm going to do next is to fast forward. And if you download the app, you've got keyboard shortcuts you can use. I'm hitting L to start the clock, and I'm going to hit L again to, this is L on the keyboard, to go a little faster. Now you can see the seconds going by much faster. If I hit L again, now even the minutes are going by faster than the second digits were going before. Now you can definitely tell that there's things happening here. The sun is getting lower in the sky and the moon is getting higher, but they're both moving westward, or they appear to be moving westward. Now, if you remember which object we said we were going to see first after sunset, Remember, that was the brightest planet. So after sunset, be watching over to the left of the brightest part of the sunset for Venus to appear. Already right there. In fact, you can often see it right at sunset. And by about 6:30, certainly by 6:45, we will definitely have the two brightest planets. If I click on them, their name appears up in the upper left. And by default, when you download Stellarium, it'll have a whole bunch of things that it'll tell you about anything you click on. So here are the two brightest planets, Venus and Jupiter, in our early evening sky. You can start watching for them by about 6:30. 7:45 is probably ideal. And then let's go fast forward some more. Remember, I said don't wait too long to try to catch Venus, because objects over here in the west are getting lower and lower in the sky.
Geoff, I would also just make the observation that planetarium computer programs like Stellarium can only show things as bright as your monitor will allow them to. So in order to show Venus's brightness, it shows it having a bigger diameter or a bigger size. In fact, Venus will look like a point of light. It will look like a really bright star, but Stellarium can't show that very accurately. So it uses size.
That's a great point. You see, don't wait too long to see Venus. The sky will be fully dark by a few minutes before 8 o'clock tonight. And by that time, Venus is already set. Now, this motion that you're seeing here is not actually the sun and the moon and the planets and the stars moving. It's actually because of the Earth spinning. The Earth spins toward the east, and that makes everything look like it's moving toward the west. Now, remember when we were trying to find Jupiter and Saturn in that beautiful photo that John took? Well, if you look in this scene, now that Venus has disappeared, you pick out the two brightest things that look like stars, and you have found Jupiter and Saturn again. There's Jupiter. And just like in the photo, Saturn will be to the right of Jupiter. Now, I mentioned that we'll have these planets up in the sky for the next couple of months. So actually, let's go back, at least an hour, so that Venus hasn't set yet. And let's actually show you what happens if we just kind of go forward in time one day at a time. And we're going to actually do a bunch. If we go back to tonight, you'll see that tonight the moon is near Jupiter. You can't use the moon to help you find Jupiter each night, because as the moon orbits around the Earth, it's going to be in a slightly different spot each night at, let's say 7 o'clock. Let's say we're going out every night at 7 o'clock. And you would notice each night that the moon is a little bit farther away from Jupiter. And if we watch, this is now coming up on the end of October, and you're starting to see that the planets are starting to kind of cluster together over there in the south. Oh, this is going to be fun. After the first week of November, in that second week, the crescent moon is going to be going past all of those planets. First Venus, and then Saturn, and then Jupiter. But notice you still got all three of these planets all throughout November. And into December, we'll have the moon passing by those planets again. And then by the end of the year, we're going to start losing Venus. But I don't know if this is, we're going to probably have to go a little bit earlier. But if you watch here, as we're losing Venus, we're going to replace it with Mercury. Mercury will be hiding down low in the sunset. We could even maybe use Venus to help us find it at the end of the year. You might be asking, why are these planets all lining up? Especially until we got to Mercury. Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter look like they were lining up, and that's because that's the plane of the solar system. That's not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. All the planets orbit around the sun in one flat area, which makes them line up like that in the sky. That's normal. All right, let's go back to tonight, October 15th. And let's go back to 8 p.m. By 8 p.m. tonight, I said it would be fully dark. You don't have to go out at midnight to have it be fully dark. By 8 p.m. tonight, it will already be as dark as it's going to get. Now, in addition to the planets, one thing that I want you to do is to go out and look straight up. Now, in here, we have to click and drag. And when you go to the point where you're seeing directly over your head outside, we call that the zenith. So it's marked with the Z. And high overhead, this time of the year, you can see a bright triangle made of 3 stars in separate constellations. My arrow is at the center of that triangle right now. We call that the summer triangle. I know it's not summer anymore, but back in June, the summer triangle would have been opposite the sun so that it would be up all night long. As the sun was setting, the summer triangle was just rising. And next to the summer triangle, we can kind of orient ourselves to the horizon here, because we don't have to look quite so high in the sky. But my arrow is now at the center of a square. Isn't that a great looking square? In fact, it's such a great square that we call it the Great Square. And it's also known as the Great Square of Pegasus. It's also known as the Autumn Square, because last month, when we had the beginning of fall, the Autumn Square would have been just like the summer triangle in summer. It was opposite the sun, so that it would be up all night long at the beginning of fall. So we've got summer triangle, autumn square, but we haven't found the Big Dipper yet. Now, you'll never see here in Wisconsin the Big Dipper here in the South. You won't see it anywhere in the South, at least not if you're on the planet Earth. And so let's look to the north. I'll try not to get you too dizzy dragging things around here. And remember the shape we're looking for, that curved handle, and then the bowl to hold the water. Look and see if you can spot it before I point it out. Up above my arrow, if you're still searching. The end of the arrow, the end of the handle is here. The end of the bowl is here. So that's the star pattern that we call the Big Dipper. Now, if I click on one of the stars here, I can turn on the star patterns for just that constellation. And you can see that the constellation that the Big Dipper is in is more than just the Big Dipper. The constellation name is Ursa Major. And Ursa means bear, major means big. So of course, I'm sure the first thing you thought of when you saw these lines was, oh, that looks like a big bear. You can probably imagine a lot of things that maybe it looks more like than a big bear. But here's one artist's impression of the big bear. Somehow you have to account for the fact that it has a long stretched out tail. Now, there are actually 88 constellations. So if I clear that out, we can actually put up the lines for all of the constellations. There is a trick to help you find the North Star using the 2 stars at the end of the bowl, the Big Dipper. They can act just like an arrow pointing up to the North Star here. At the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. But the Little Dipper is actually in a constellation called Ursa Minor. I'll put on all the constellation names. And we'll add in all of the artwork. Now I know that we are at our assigned ending time right now, and I haven't really seen any questions coming through in the chat, but I hope you do get a chance to find Summer Triangle high overhead. Remember the Autumn Square kind of next to it, Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus, all in the early evening sky, and the Big Dipper. Notice that the Big Dipper is low and right side up this time of the year. look for it at other times of the year too, and you'll find that it's not always in that same spot. Hope you enjoy looking up at the beautiful night sky. Hope we get a chance to observe together someday, and I hope you get a chance to come to the planetarium someday. Thanks for joining us.